Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Charts with Dan, where on Wednesday, because final box office numbers weren't available until yesterday due to the Martin Luther King holiday here in the U.S., and it was a very close race between first place and second place at the box office, so I wanted to make sure I got those numbers right. So we're going to talk all about the box office, as well as some huge numbers for Netflix and some big shakeups in their all-time rankings and a bunch of other numbers. But before we get to that, I want to take a couple of moments. I used to acknowledge more on the show people that passed away, and it kind of became a game of, well, you mentioned that person, but why didn't you mention this person? So I don't do it as much, but I have to take a couple of minutes to acknowledge the passing of David Lynch. He passed away last week and will go down as one of the most singular filmmakers of all time, someone of uncompromising vision, and somebody who sometimes it seemed like was the only one capable of understanding that vision. David Lynch is the filmmaker that is always the answer when people ask me about subjectivity in films and how I judge certain things and how I can maybe not necessarily like a movie, but I can respect it or I can admire it. And there were 2 or 3 David Lynch films that were the cornerstone of that for me. I remember that Mulholland Drive came out when I was in college, much younger in my film journey, and I went and saw it and thought to myself at the time, well, this is meaningless. I don't get it. How could people say that this is a great movie? And then I would read reviews, I'd read analysis and criticism of it and see what others saw in his film and in his other movies that I didn't see. And that really helped to educate me as a film lover, first and foremost, about the idea of something that maybe doesn't resonate with you, but resonates with somebody else and the value of that. And that's what David Lynch devoted his career to. He didn't make movies that were quote unquote for everybody. He made the movies that he wanted to make, and then he allowed the audience to find those movies. So even though I don't count myself as one of the biggest fans of David Lynch's movies, I am a huge fan of his. And in a strange way, he's still a crucial part of shaping how I look at movies and how I look at how other people see movies. And honestly, looking at all of the tributes and everything else, it's inspired me to go back and take another look at a lot of David Lynch's movies. Maybe I'll do something about that here on the channel. But I feel like David Lynch's legacy has to be recognized and has to be acknowledged. You hear a lot that when somebody passes away that they were truly one of a kind. David Lynch is a filmmaker who will perhaps be imitated and has been imitated over the years, but will absolutely never be replaced.
Cinema is a thing that deals with things beyond words, and it's so beautiful. It talks to you, but not with words alone. So just go in open and just go in and have an experience in a different world.
All right, let's jump now into the box office for this past weekend. It was a 4-day weekend here in the U.S., so I'm going to give you the 3-day numbers as well as the 4-day numbers, and it was very close between first place and second place. But when the final numbers came in, Mufasa the Lion King retook the number 1 spot by about $200,000 over a surprisingly strong performance from the comedy One of Them Days, which made $11.8 million. I reviewed One of Them Days here on the channel. I'm not surprised that it overperformed expectations because it is a very, very funny movie, and I think that the word of mouth on the movie was probably very good this weekend, and we'll see what it does in weekend number 2. But Mufasa the Lion King remains number 1. It dropped just 15% in its 5th week of release. Its domestic total is now at over $200 million. In a surprise third place is Wolfman, which many people, including myself, assumed would open number 1. It did not have good word of mouth, nor did it have particularly strong reviews. It came in at $10.8 million to open outside the top 2 even. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 dropped 24% in weekend number 5 for an $8.6 million total. Its domestic total now at $216.5 million. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, which was the number 1 movie last weekend, drops 56% in weekend number 2 and a $6.5 million total. Its domestic total now is at $26.1 million. In 6th place was Moana 2. In its 8th weekend of release, it dropped just 8% from the previous weekend for a $5.9 million total. It's at $442.7 million, or I should say it was at the end of the 3-day weekend. Nosferatu drops 40% in its 4th weekend of release for $4.1 million, good enough for 7th place. A Complete Unknown drops 27% in its 4th weekend of release. It's now over $50 million domestically and approaching 60. Wicked is still in the top 10. It made $3.5 $325 million. Its domestic total now approaching $470 million. And Baby Girl sticks around the top 10 for another week. It dropped 34%. It's now at $25.3 million. And perhaps fittingly, because this past weekend was the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, both movies at number 1 and number 2 were directed by black filmmakers, and that actually inspired a trivia question for this week's show, which is, when was the last time that the top 2 films at the box office were helmed by black directors? I will give you a couple of seconds here to think it over, and we're going to go ahead and reveal the answer. The last time was actually not so far back. It was June 9th through the 11th, 2023, when Stephen Caple Jr.'s Transformers Rise of the Beasts and Spider-Man Across the Universe, which was co-directed by Kemp Powers, were numbers 1 and 2. If you want to talk about solo directors, then the last time was back in 2018, when Black Panther from Ryan Coogler and A Wrinkle in Time from Ava DuVernay were at number 1 and number 2 at the box office. So a rare box office occurrence, and hopefully one that will not be quite as rare going forward. Let's look now at the 4-day weekend numbers. So this is Friday through Monday, and the order is pretty much the same. Mufasa the Lion King brings home $15.4 million, a bigger margin here than the 3-day numbers. Not surprising, a lot of kids are out of school. The family films did well. One of Them Days stays in second place at $14 million. Wolfman is in third at $12.2 million, followed by Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at $11 million. When you factor in all 4 days, Moana 2 is actually the number 5 movie at $7.7 million. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera slips just behind it at number 6 with $7.6 million, followed by Nosferatu at $4.9 million. A Complete Unknown at $4.534 million. Wicked just behind at $4.525 million, about $10,000 separating those two films. And Baby Girl rounding out the top 10 with $2.4 million. And speaking of Nosferatu, it is now, according to my personal calculations, the 4th highest grossing film from Focus Features, because I include Coraline and 50 Shades of Grey. Some sources don't. But it has now passed Brokeback Mountain for number 4 on the list, and it's only about $7 million, a little less than $7 million, behind Downton Abbey to be the number 3 movie on this list. Some people would consider that number 1, but still, Nosferatu is angling to become just the 3rd film in Focus Features history to break $100 million if it can bank just another $10 million at the box office. Dropping out of the top 10 this past weekend after 1 week apiece were Game Changer from India and The Last Showgirl starring Pamela Anderson and Jamie Lee Curtis, who's getting some Oscar buzz. Nominations are going to be announced tomorrow morning, and if either or both of them should be nominated, then we may see a boost in business for The Last Showgirl. Looking at the biggest theater count changes for this past weekend, The Wild Robot actually led all movies. There was an expansion of its release, a re-expansion, with 972 theaters added. It actually goes back into wide release at 1,076 theaters total. We'll talk about that expansion in just a minute. The Fire Inside loses 837 theaters. It's now in just 185. The Room Next Door from Pedro Almodovar added 817 theaters. It's in 861 total, by far its biggest expansion. Gladiator 2 lost 715 theaters. It's out of wide release in just 614. And Kraven the Hunter continues to shed theaters. It lost 628 theaters. It's now in just 376. And to loop back to those big expansions for The Wild Robot and The Room Next Door, this was actually a marketing strategy on the part of the studios that had a bit of a monkey wrench thrown into it, because if you'll recall, Oscar nominations were supposed to happen last week, but they were delayed because of the wildfires in LA. They're now happening on tomorrow morning. But there were several studios that had already planned to either expand or re-expand a lot of their movies on the hope that those films had gotten some nominations and that people would go out to see them. So it's not just The Wild Robot and The Room Next Door that saw some big expansions this past weekend. Sing Sing actually received what they're calling a re-release at the studio level. It barely got a release to begin with, but by far its widest release. It was put in 560 theaters. Unfortunately, it did not perform well, again, because it didn't really have any support from Oscar nominations, because there weren't any. Conclave added 474 theaters. That is a big Oscar hopeful. The Substance added 470 theaters. Anora went back out to 425 theaters. The Brutalist had its biggest expansion yet at 270 theaters. And Nickel Boys also was in the most theaters it ever has been at 214 theaters. Obviously, those studios studios decided not to change the strategy. It would have been pretty late in the game to do that, quite honestly. So it'll be interesting to see next week if they are held over in those theaters based on the Oscar nominations, or if this was just unfortunate timing and there are some markets that are not going to have a chance to see these movies, all of which are considered to be, except for maybe The Room Next Door, frontrunners in at least one or two major categories. And with the Oscar nominations pending, I decided to tie this week's member poll question to the Academy Awards. You can vote in this poll if you are a member here on the channel. If you're not a member, depending on how you're watching it, there may be a button for you to push to become a member, or you can find information down in the description below. But I wanted to talk about movies that got nominated for a bunch of Oscars but didn't win any. And there are actually 4 in the 21st century that were nominated for 10 Oscars apiece but went home completely empty-handed. So my question this week is, what 21st century winless movie do you think most deserved an Oscar? It can be an Oscar in any category. And the options are Gangs of New York, which went 0 for 10, True Grit, which went 0 for 10, American Hustle, which went 0 for 10, and then The Irishman, which went 0 for 10 at the Academy Awards shortly before closure started due to the pandemic. So which of those 4 movies, 2 of them, by the way, from Martin Scorsese, do you think should have been given an Oscar? Vote in the poll. I will announce the results here next week. And speaking of results, I have the results from last week's poll. We were talking about Better Man, which is a biopic of Robbie Williams as depicted by a CGI ape. And I asked you which of these 4 top grossing music biopics is the best. Now, Elvis was not on here because I honestly missed it when I was compiling the data. Thank you, Box Office Mojo. You are completely broken now. I have to do everything manually. But these were the 4 options you had. And Straight Outta Compton actually won pretty handily with 38% of the vote. 8 Mile came in second place at 27%, followed by Walk the Line at 21%. And then bringing up the rear was actually the highest grossing musical biopic of all time, Bohemian Rhapsody, at 14%. So make sure you vote in the poll for this week, because you never know, those results may be a lot closer. Let's take a look at this week's Road to Recovery. The blue line is the box office weekend average from 2015 to 2019. The red line is the weekend average from 2021 to 2024. And the dotted black line is every weekend so far this year. And you can see it's sort of been the story of the year so far. The good news is we are fairly comfortably ahead of where we have been on average after theaters reopened following the pandemic, but we are nowhere near the box office average from 2015 to 2019. And remember, this is a year where studios and theaters are looking for a big recovery. January, not typically a big blockbuster month, but even given that, we are not having a incredible start to the year. We'll see if February can maybe kick it into high gear. But yeah, kind of more of the same as far as the box office and attendance so far this year, similar to what we've seen the last 4 years. And to remind us all of what the box office picture was just 10 years ago, I'm actually bringing up the box office flashback from the end of the show to go back to this same weekend back in 2015, over the 4-day Martin Luther King Day weekend. This was the box office market then. American Sniper had expanded to wide release. It brought in $107.2 million in January. That's unheard of. I think that is still a record or close to it. Paddington also opened 10 years ago over Martin Luther King Day. It brought in $25.4 million. The Wedding Ringer brought in $24 million. I think in today's market, that probably would have been a streaming movie. Taken 3 was still on the marketplace. It brought in $17 million in its second week. And then Selma, which today I could see is like perhaps a Netflix original movie, brought in $13.8 million as it went wider in its 4th week of release. So, I mean, look, that drop-off is pretty crazy. Yes, this is sort of an outlier as far as January weekends, but it just kind of shows you how far we have fallen. And I think it's a combination of people not going to the movies as much and streamers taking movies that might have been a box office draw and having them being at-home exclusives. Let's look now at the top 5 films outside of the US and Canada. These are the top 5 international movies. Mufasa the Lion King brought in $20.3 million, followed by Sonic the Hedgehog 3 at $15.2 million. Octopus with Broken Arms brought in $8 million. This is a film from China. It's already made over $100 million there, so it is a hit movie in China. Moana 2 brought in another $7.9 million, and Nosferatu brought in $7.6 million. When you take those international numbers, you combine them with our domestic numbers, we get the top 5 films worldwide for the past 3-day weekend. And Mufasa the Lion King is once again number one. It dropped just 22.6% for another $31.8 million. Its worldwide total now approaching $600 million. Sonic the Hedgehog 3, a similar drop. It dropped 24% for a $23.8 million total. It's now close to $420 million worldwide. Wolfman was driven largely by its domestic debut. It brought in $15.3 million, followed by Moana 2, which dropped 20.6% to bring in $13.9 million and crossed that ever-coveted billion-dollar mark. It's the third billion-dollar movie released in 2024. It's also the third billion-dollar movie released by Disney in 2024, so it's sort of the period at the bottom of the exclamation point of their box office comeback last year. And then Nosferatu stays in the top 5. It dropped 41.8%. It's at $11.9 million, and its worldwide total is at over $150 million. We've got so many more numbers to break down, but before we do, I want to thank the sponsor for this week's show. This episode's brought to you by Warby Parker. You know, I used to hate shopping for glasses. I switched to wearing them over 10 years ago after wearing contacts forever, and I never liked the selection at the optometrist, but Warby Parker changed all that. If you've seen this channel, then you've seen me wearing Warby Parker glasses. I'm wearing them right now, and I have been wearing them for years. When I first started buying at Warby Parker, they were a pretty new company, and it's only gotten better over the years. Not only do they sell eyeglasses, but they now also offer sunglasses, contact lenses, and eye exams. If you can't visit one of Warby Parker's over 250 retail stores in the US and Canada, you can also shop online with a virtual try-on. Then they'll send you up to 5 frames to try on at home. It's how I bought my first pair, and also how I got my mom fitted with a pair of Warby Parker glasses. Warby Parker glasses start at $95 and include prescription lenses with anti-reflective, scratch-resistant coatings. And right now you can add a pair and save 15% when you purchase 2 or more prescription pairs of glasses or sunglasses. And this offer is available both at home and in stores. I'm actually really happy that I'm able to partner up with Warby Parker because I love talking about something that I use every single day. I've got my eye exam coming up soon this year, and if I do need a new pair of glasses, I know exactly where I'll be heading. You can get started right now with Warby Parker's virtual try-on. You can try on glasses and sunglasses, seeing the realistic color, texture, and size of each style right from home right now. Head over to warbyparker.com/Murrell to take the home try-on quiz and pick 5 pairs of frames to try on at home for free. That's warbyparker.com/Murrell, warbyparker.com/Murrell. Let's take a look now at what I call the specialty charts for the past weekend, and we'll start with the top per theater averages. At number 1 is a Brazilian film called I'm Still Here. Fernanda Torres, who puts in a great performance in this movie, is considered by many, including myself, to be a top contender to get an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress tomorrow. It opened in 5 theaters and brought in $22,741 per theater. The Brutalist, as I mentioned before, expanded to 338 theaters. It brought in $5,863 per theater, so it continues to be a big draw in the limited release market. One of Them Days opened at number 2, but it actually had a higher per theater average than Mufasa the Lion King. It brought in $4,414 per theater in 2,675 theaters. Dig 20 played in 3 theaters and brought in $4,005 per theater. Dig 20 is a recut version of director Ondi Timoner's documentary following the Dandy Warhols and the Brian Jonestown Massacre on its 20th anniversary. And then coming in 5th place is Mufasa the Lion King, which brought in $3,391 per theater in each of its 3,555 theaters. Looking at the top films in limited release, which I define as 1,000 theaters or fewer, The Brutalist is at number 1 with $1.9 million in 338 theaters. Also in 338 theaters is a film from India, which brought in just under $1 million, and I'm going to do my absolute best here. Sankranthiki Vastunam is a Telugu language comedy from India, and it comes in 2nd place in the limited release box office. In 3rd place is The Last Showgirl, just under that wide release threshold. It's in 946 theaters. It brought in $877,000. The Room Next Door in 861 theaters brought in $616,000. And then September 5 in 121 theaters brought in $350,000. Interestingly, September 5 was supposed to go into wide release this past weekend, but Paramount was one of the studios that delayed its plans to expand the film, maybe waiting out to see what the Academy Awards were going to do. September 5 hasn't really been lighting the world on fire in limited release, so maybe they were trying to decide and see what would happen with the Oscar nominations before they put more resources into a wide release. But yeah, that was a movie that was scheduled to be in many, many more markets nationwide, but that the studio said, you know what, hang on. Let's wait just a second. This is what the 2025 annual domestic box office looks like. These are movies that were released in 2025. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera's at number 1 with $27.2 million. One of Them Days is in second place at just over $14 million, followed by Wolfman in third place at $12.2 million. I'm going to try it again. San Crenthiki Vestunum is in fourth place at $2.3 million, followed by Game Changer, which has just over $2 million in reported revenue, and The Damned in sixth place at $1.3 million. The rest of the top 10 has yet to be filled out, but it should be filled out probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I do have some updates to the 2024 annual domestic box office, because keep in mind, if a movie was released in 2024, we still keep updating this chart, even if they make that money in 2025. And Mufasa the Lion King is now the 10th highest grossing film domestically of 2024. It knocks out Godzilla, Kong, The New Empire, and those are your 10. Those are going to be the 10 highest grossing movies of the year domestically, although it looks like Mufasa the Lion King may have enough life in it to overtake Sonic the Hedgehog 3. We're going to have to see how these movies do over the next 2 or 3 weeks, but we do finally have the final 10 movies, and it is also, I believe, the first time since 2019, pre-pandemic, that all 10 movies in the domestic top 10 at the end of the year made over $200 million. So that's a nice little feather in the cap, although I'm sure studios and theaters wish that the recovery had been coming along even quicker. Looking at the 2024 worldwide box office, Mufasa the Lion King is also on the move there as well. It's just under the $600 million mark. That's enough to move it up to number 7 for the year, which bumps Godzilla, Kong, The New Empire down to number 8 and Kung Fu Panda 4 down to number 9. Wicked is only about $5 million away from eclipsing Dune Part 2 to become the 5th highest grossing movie of the year worldwide. And as you can see there at numbers 1, 2, and 3, we now have 3 films in the $1 billion club with Inside Out 2, Deadpool and Wolverine, and Moana 2. So that's all I got for the box office, but we also have a lot of numbers in the streaming world as well, and a lot of movement on those charts. First of all, because this show is on Wednesday, I've got 2 weeks of Netflix numbers to give you, because Netflix releases new numbers on Tuesday, which is usually after I do the show, but this week I can do 2 at once. So let's look first at the weekend of January 6th to January 12th, which saw Squid Game Season 2 continuing its dominance at number 1 with 26.28 million views. Ad Vitam is in second place with 17.15 million views. It's a French movie about a man wrapped up in something bigger than himself, trying to save his wife. Missing You is in third place at 15.19 million views, followed by The Secret Life of Pets 2 at just over 15 million views, the only non-Netflix original on this top 10 list. The Breakthrough entered the chart at number 5 at 10.5 million views. It's a Swedish limited series about the use of genealogy to solve crimes. At number 6, American Primeval debuted on the top 10 list. The show stars Taylor Kitsch, Betty Gilpin, and Dane DeHaan as part of the ensemble in this drama about the birth of the American West. It's from creator Mark L. Smith, who also wrote The Revenant with Alejandro Gonzalez Iñárritu. In 7th place was Squid Game Season 1 at 8.73 million views, so a lot of people catching up or going back to watch that first season. In 8th place was Jerry Springer Fights Camera Action, a limited series that still ran, from what I could tell, less than an hour all told, about the Jerry Springer Show, which was, of course, a 90s staple. In 9th place was The Love Scam, which is an Italian movie about 2 brothers trying to con an heiress in order to get out of a financial hole. It brought in 7.25 million views. And then Carry On spends another week in the top 10 at 7.15 million views. Now let's look at the latest numbers, which are for January 13th through the 19th. At number 1 is Back in Action, the Jamie Foxx, Cameron Diaz action movie. And it may be tough to kind of contextualize that because it's the beginning of the year, but it debuted to 46.79 million views. To put that into context, if you look at that versus the numbers in 2024, that would have been the biggest debut for a Netflix movie last year, the second biggest debut looking at all programs, the third biggest viewership number for all movies in 1 week, regardless of when they debuted, and the 5th highest number number overall in 1 week for all programming. So Back in Action is really continuing this hot streak that Netflix has been on with Carry On and Squid Game Season 2. Staying in second place was Ad Vitam with another 25.54 million views, followed by American Primeval, which makes a big jump at 14.33 million views. Exo Kitty Season 2 debuts in fourth place at 14.19 million views. It's the sophomore season of creator Jenny Han's show. She also wrote the To All the Boys I've Loved Before series. Squid Game Season 2 stays in the top 5 with another 13.23 million views, followed by The Secret Life of Pets 2 in sixth place. In seventh place is Sakamoto Days, an anime adaptation of a manga series about a reformed hitman whose past catches up with him. The Breakthrough falls to number 8 at 6.94 million views, followed by Missing You in ninth place at 5.58 million views, and The Secret Life of Pets, the original film, rounding out the top 10 at 5.24 million views. And when we look at the list of most watched 2024 Netflix releases, some of these numbers spill over into 2025 as well. Squid Game Season 2 is now officially the most viewed program that Netflix released in 2024 at 165.75 million total views. That drops Carry On down to second place with a measly 160 million views after just 1 week at the top. Damsel is in third. Under Paris has had a bit of a resurgence in views at the end of the year, enough for it to move up to fourth place at 106.46 million views over Bridgerton Season 3, which is now in fifth place. Number 6 through 10 remain the same with The Union, Rebel Ridge, Lift, Society of the Snow, and Fool Me Once. But Squid Game and Carry On are not just moving up the 2024 charts. First of all, these are the 10 most viewed Netflix films since they started reporting numbers back in June of 2021. Carry On is now at number 4 on that list at 160 million views, and it is within striking distance of that number 2 spot. It could easily bypass Extraction and Don't Look Up. The Adam Project gets bumped down to number 5, followed by Bird Box, Leave the World Behind, The Gray Man, Damsel, and We Can Be Heroes. The Mother is now off of the list of the 10 most viewed Netflix films of the past 4 years, or almost 4 years. Also looking at the 10 most viewed Netflix series since June of 2021 when numbers were reported, Squid Game Season 2 moves up to number 3 at 165.75 million views. It is healthily behind Wednesday Season 1 and, of course, the first season of Squid Game, which with the extra views is now over 300 million total views since it was released. But still, to be at number 3 all time after 3 weeks of release, I think, is pretty good. Stranger Things 4 gets bumped down to 4th place, and Bridgerton Season 1 gets bumped down to 5th place. And finally, looking at the top 10 most viewed Netflix programs, regardless of whether it's a movie or series, since June of 2021, both Carry On and Squid Game Season 2 are now on the all-time top 10. Carry On is in 7th place, which bumps The Adam Project, Bird Box, and Leave the World Behind down to numbers 8, 9, and 10. And Squid Game Season 2 is now the 5th most watched Netflix program since 2021. It's now just behind Don't Look Up, Red Notice, Wednesday Season 1, and the first season of Squid Game. Stranger Things 4 and Bridgerton Season 1 are dropped off of the all-time Netflix top 10, or at least all-time since views were reported. Let's take a look now at the Nielsen numbers. Now, these are domestic only, not worldwide like we just saw with Netflix, and they're delayed by about a month because that's how long Nielsen takes to put them out. Let's look at the numbers for December 16th through the 22nd, the week before Christmas, the next to last week of the year. And Carry On was the number 1 movie. Remember last week, Red One debuted with a huge number. Carry On was in 2nd place. They flip-flopped places in their respective second weeks of release. Carry On brought in 32 million hours watched. Red One brought in 27.6 million hours watched. The 6888 on Netflix from Tyler Perry debuts in 3rd at 14.45 million hours watched. Then we have a whole slew of holiday classics. Home Alone in 4th place, The Grinch in 5th place, Elf in 6th place, and How the Grinch Stole Christmas debuting on the chart in 7th place. At number 8, again, this was just before all of the legal drama began. It Ends With Us brought in 7 million hours watched, followed by The Dead Don't Die. I never would have guessed Jim Jarmusch zombie movie in the top 10, but it brought in 6.6 million hours watched. And then Home Alone 2 Lost in New York debuts on the chart at 6.5 million hours watched. Of course, those holiday viewing numbers will probably peak next week as we get the viewership numbers for the week of Christmas. And speaking of Red One and Carry On, last week, as you'll recall, Red One had the biggest weekly number for any movie so far in 2024, according to Nielsen, at 35 million hours watched. Carry On had the second biggest number for any movie of 2024 at 32 million hours watched in its second week of release. So Red won with the most hours watched, Carry On just behind in its second week. That bumps the debut week of Beverly Hills Cop Axel F down to number 3 at 34.1 million hours watched. Inside Out 2's in fourth at 30.3 million hours watched. And then the first week, the debut of Carry On rounds out the top 5. So Carry On actually has 2 spots in this top 5 at 28.2 million. And the second week of Red 1 would actually be number 6 on this list. So Red 1 and Carry On really racking up viewership domestically as we were approaching Christmas. And we know from the Netflix numbers that Carry On was racking up those same numbers around the world. These are the most watched streaming movies in the US according to Nielsen through December 22nd, and Red 1 and Carry On both cracked the top 5. Carry On is currently at number 5. Red 1 enters the chart at number 4. They're both behind Inside Out 2, the Super Mario Brothers movie, and the champ of champs, Moana, on Disney+. Damsel, Trolls Band Together, Rebel Ridge, Beverly Hills Cop Axel F, and The Union are all knocked down the chart, with Inside Out and 2024's Roadhouse exiting the top 10. These are the 10 most watched streaming shows for December 16th through the 22nd. At number 1 is the debut of the new season of Virgin River, which brought in 30.3 million hours watched domestically, followed by Bluey on Disney Plus at 18.1 million hours watched. Then we had the debut of La Palma on Netflix at 14.8 million hours watched. The Equalizer also hitting the chart for the first time at 14.5 million. This is not the movie, this is the television show. Landman on Paramount Plus is in 5th place, followed by Family Guy, Bob's Burgers, No Good Deed, Grey's Anatomy, and returning to that number 10 spot is The Big Bang Theory on Max at 10.3 million hours watched. Looking at the top shows as far as watch time per available episode, so you take all the hours they were watched and divide them by the number of episodes that are available on their streaming services, La Palma comes out on top. It was only 4 episodes, and it brought in 3.72 million hours of watch time per episode. Landman comes in second with just over 2 million hours per episode. Then we have No Good Deed at 1.62 million hours watched per episode, and Black Doves on Netflix, the only other show with an hours watched per episode time over a million. It's at 1.2 million. The Madness is in 5th place, another Netflix show, followed by Virgin River, Special Ops Lioness, The Ultimatum, The Equalizer, and AP Bio. And finally, we have a change as far as the most watched original streaming series since Nielsen began reporting numbers in 2020. The new season of Virgin River puts it back above Cobra Kai. I think Cobra Kai actually passed Virgin River not too long ago because it had a new season. Virgin River now back up to that number 6 spot until I assume the new season of Cobra Kai comes out, in which case they'll probably switch places again. So a pretty minor change here. Stranger Things still the most watched original streaming series since 2020, followed by Ozark. And that does it for Charts with Dan this week. Quickly, though, I wanted to flag a couple things you might be interested in if you are heading out to the theaters or catching something on streaming this upcoming week. First of all, tonight on Wednesday, Talk to Me will be hitting IMAX. A24 is re-releasing some of its films in IMAX, and Talk to Me is the latest. It's one of my favorite A24 horror films and A24 films, period. So if you haven't seen Talk to Me, I think it'd be pretty awesome to see in IMAX for the first time or to go see it again. On Thursday, The Night Agent Season 2 debuts on Netflix. Nearly 2 years after Season 1 ended, the political thriller is back for a second season, and the first season's actually been popping up on the Netflix charts for the last couple weeks, so I'd expect a big number for this debut of Season 2. And then on Friday, there are several movies that are hitting theaters. One of them is Flight Risk. Michelle Dockery is escorting a prisoner, played by Topher Grace, on a plane, and they're threatened midair by a psychopath, played by Mark Wahlberg. Flight Risk is credited as being from the director of Braveheart and Apocalypto, who, in other words, would be known as Mel Gibson. Also opening on Friday is Presence, which is a Steven Soderbergh ghost movie. It's actually playing near me. I'm excited. I've heard good things about this. It's written by David Koepp and stars Julia Fox and Lucy Liu. Neon is distributing that film. In many theaters nationwide is Brave the Dark, which is the latest from Angel Studios. Damian Harris directs his brother Jared Harris in this story about a troubled teen who finds a supportive teacher. Also in many theaters around the country is Inheritance from Limitless and Divergent director Neil Berger. Phoebe Dynevor plays a spy's daughter who's brought into the world of espionage. Rhys Ifans also stars. And then in limited release is a movie called The Colors Within. It's an anime film from director Naoko Yamada, who directed A Silent Voice, about a young girl who can see people as colors. That sounds like a pretty good idea for an animated film. So you can catch all of those movies and more in a theater near you. And that's all I've got for you this week. Be sure to stay tuned to the channel though, because tomorrow morning I will be up bright and early to watch the Oscar nominations. There are a lot of question marks, and then I will have my analysis and reaction right here on the channel as soon as I can get it done. So be sure to hit that bell so you're notified when that video goes up tomorrow morning. And of course, I'll be doing box office and movie reviews and news and everything else we do here as we get closer to the Oscars and further into the year. Thank you to the sponsor for this episode, Warby Parker. You can check the description below for more about them. And thank you for coming today to watch this show. Until next time, as always, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.